So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kathleen Kohler, and I'll be your moderator and discussant. Welcome to Suffice's webinar, Easy to Read, Easy to Use, How to Write About Your Work in Words Everyone Will Understand. We have two presenters with us today. I'd like to introduce you to Nicole Bedford and Carly Foubert. Nicole Bedford has worked in the field of communications for over 10 years. During this time, she has honed her ability to write clearly for many different audiences. She applies this skill in her role as the project manager and communications coordinator for Community First, Impacts of Community Engagement, better known as the Suffice Project. Carly Foubert is the Communications Research Assistant for Community First, Impacts of Community Engagement. Carly's educational training is in communications and journalism. For the past 2 years, she has used her writing skills to share Suffice's research through stories, podcasts, and more. So I'll turn it over to Nicole, and away we go.
Okay, welcome everyone to our Plain Language Writing webinar. Today we'll be going over techniques for how to write in plain language so your audiences understand the messages you're trying to convey. What are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to start with a brief overview of what plain language writing is and isn't. Then we'll explain why it's important, particularly in a community campus engagement setting. And then we'll go over how to write in plain language. Finally, we'll end today's session by going over a few helpful resources, and we'll collect some feedback from you on the usefulness of this session. And then we'll end with a Q&A. Now, there are a lot of misconceptions about plain language writing. In fact, at a recent meeting, I was actually surprised when some of our attendees wanted us to stop using the term. They saw it as dumbing down complicated research. So let me just clarify. Plain language writing is not about dumbing down the content. It's not meant to be patronizing. It's not about oversimplifying complex concepts. Instead, it's about explaining concepts in ways that people will understand. It's not about being stuck using boring language. It's about using language that is direct and precise. And most importantly, it's not just for academics. Community organizations and groups often have their own jargon and language that others may not understand. So, what is plain language writing? Well, it's communication that is clear and easy to understand the first time it's read. It's writing that looks at the whole message being conveyed from the reader's point of view. You can tell if your material is in plain language if your target audience can find what they need, understand what they find, and use what they find to meet their needs. Now we're going to go over a bunch of elements that generally make up plain language writing, but I want you to know that plain language writing isn't defined by any one specific technique. Rather, it's defined by results. In other words, if your content is easy for your audience to read, understand, and use, then you're writing in plain language. When I was preparing for this presentation, I read a quote that I think highlighted perfectly why plain language writing is important. It states, plain language embodies the idea that information is a human right. Everyone has the right to access information they can understand. This idea is even more important when we look at the average literacy rates of Canadians. 4 in 10 adult Canadians do not have the literacy skills they need to meet the demands of modern life. 14.6% of adult Canadians don't have the skills to deal with the majority of writing materials that they are faced with. 27% of adult Canadians have the skills to carry out reading tasks when the materials are simple, but not the skills to cope with unfamiliar or complex reading material. The average American is considered to have a readability level equivalent to a 7th or 8th grader. And by not addressing the readability of your content, you could be also actively discriminating against users with learning disabilities. Now, this research, aside from the American statistics there, is based on a Statistics Canada study from 2003. Regardless, I think it's pretty safe to say that literacy rates aren't likely to have changed much since then. So these statistics really shed light on the potential audience you might miss if you don't write your content in plain language. The idea that everyone has the right to access information they can understand goes even deeper when we start thinking about the political and structural implications of language. According to Orson Welles, language is an instrument which we shape for our own purposes. The way he sees it, we need to use plain language in our communication because language shapes how we understand and think about our society. Because he's specifically talking about political speech, he points out how we often use vague, nondescript language to shape society's tolerance of otherwise heinous acts. During war, for example, we might say we're pacifying the enemy, because very few people would support these actions if politicians said they were bombing defenseless villages, driving the inhabitants out into the countryside, and setting their huts on fire. In this case, plain language that clearly describes the situation would be a problem for politicians. But this example demonstrates the power of plain language to shape the way we think and act. This extends to how we think and act in community campus engagement partnerships, as well as how we might be able to influence the people who will benefit from our partnership work. Both community and academic partners come to these partnerships with preconceived notions of how the projects will progress. From coming to the partnership with different timelines to presenters having different project goals, plain language gives us the terminology we need to clearly express our ideas without having to come up with a whole new collaborative language. As well, it allows us to communicate our project outcomes to specific audiences who will benefit from our knowledge. So let's take a look at how this works. The first step in plain language writing is to understand your audience and your purpose for writing with this audience in mind. So ask yourself, who is your audience? Who will be reading your document? Describe them and be as specific as possible. Is it one person, like a supervisor, a specific group, groups of mixed ages and backgrounds with similar beliefs or characteristics? What's their reading level? How much do they know about the topic already? What's their most pressing problem in relation to your work? When and where do you think they'll be reading your content? In line to talk to a customer service agent? At home with a warm cup of coffee? By describing your target audience in detail, you'll have a good sense of how you should deliver your message to them. Now you need to consider the main purpose for why you're writing for this audience. To do this, ask yourself, why are you writing this document? What is your main purpose or goal? Is it to report, to inform, to influence action, to explain a process, to ask someone to do something? How do you think the majority of your audience will use your information? How do you want them to use your information? The answers to these questions will help you determine what to write about and how to write about it so your audience understands your message and takes the action you want from them. To show you how it all comes together, let's say I work for a not-for-profit called Girls in Football SA. My primary goal is to use soccer to help South African girls develop self-esteem and teach them about body ownership and health issues like HIV/AIDS. To ensure my organization can continue its work, I need people to share our information and donate to our cause. So I need to figure out who to target to build the support I need. One of the least tapped audiences for my organization has been students at Western universities. I think this is a good target audience because many students are open to learning new things about the world. They're on social media, they like to share information with each other, and they're passionate about causes that are important to them. If I can introduce them to my organization before they leave university, they're more likely to continue their support financially once they have a stable income. So I develop an audience profile for the typical university student in each targeted country, starting with Canada. I start by looking at university statistics. According to Universities Canada, in 2010, 56% of university students were women, so my target audience that I've profiled identifies as a woman. I've named her Kate. She's 22 years old, a third-year undergraduate art student studying communications. She has a grade 12 reading level. Like many students, she's health conscious and likes staying active. In particular, she likes sports. And while she enjoys sports that are team-based, she prefers sports that are individually focused, like running, swimming, and yoga. She accesses information primarily through social media and is most likely to share videos and content with positive messages. Finally, with respect to my organization, her most pressing question is, how can I make a difference in the world? Now that I know who I am targeting, I can think about my goals for targeting them. Primarily, I want to inform Kate about Girls in Football SA, and I want her to connect with and share my content. Since I know Kate primarily gets information through social media, I'm going to write content that is short and to the point. Her biggest concern is making a difference in the world, so my messaging is going to speak to how she can do that through helping my organization. And finally, I'm going to appeal to her love of sports in my messaging. With this information, I might develop a targeted Facebook post. It will have the message, what are you doing to change the world? At Girls in Football SA, we empower young women to become leaders through team sports. Make a difference with us. And I'll combine the post with our video about girls' empowerment through sports. I might also develop a listicle about women in sports for a BuzzFeed post. A listicle is a blog post written in the form of a list. I can also develop tweets with images like this one. My target audience is more likely to share these kinds of posts because they directly relate to concerns and passions that they have. Now, have you been paying attention? I hope so, because we're going to administer a quick quiz for you now. First of all, what is plain language writing? Well, it's communication that is clear and easy to understand the first time it's read. I'm pretty sure everyone got that one right. So, excellent. What's the first step in plain language writing? Determine your audience. And once you know your writing goal, what do you also know? What to write about and how. Cool. Now that we know the basics of plain language writing and how to get started, Carly is going to go over some tips for how to write in plain language.
Thanks, Nicole. One of the best examples of plain language writing is non-academic blogs. So we're going to look at blogs to demonstrate how writing in plain language. While writing for academics is typically aimed at an audience that knows a lot about your topic, a blog post is directed towards a more general audience that may have less of a knowledge base regarding your subject. Blog posts are also less formal and use a casual tone in writing. Part of what makes writing for a blog post so unique is how people read online. Even though websites allow more space for lengthy explanations and more words than, say, a newspaper, this does not necessarily mean that you should take advantage of this opportunity. Studies have shown that people scan web pages and only read about 18% of what's on the page. The same studies say that when you convert a print text to the web, you should reduce content by about 50%. You need to consider how and when people are consuming the content you're producing. Are they reading it on their phones during their daily morning commute on the bus? While this depends on your audience, you might want to consider keeping your blog post on the short and concise side to ensure that your audience reads to the end. Readers typically read in an F pattern when it comes to blocks of text, meaning most of the content is skimmed. This tells us a lot about how content should be written for the web and how we should take it and use it to our advantage. It demonstrates that the first two sections of your article are the most important. This is your hook and introduction. It should contain all of the most relevant information. Think about the 5 W's. Who, what, when, where, and why, and how. If someone only reads the first 2 paragraphs, will they get the most basic understanding of the topic? The vertical reading pattern down the left side of the screen indicates that each paragraph should be enticing and encourage readers to read on. It's also an indication that only one thought should be covered in each paragraph. You can also try to avoid the dreaded F pattern by breaking up walls of text by using headings, subheadings, and lists. Adding visuals are also pretty effective at breaking up the text wall. Sentence structure is also very important. This determines readability, which is about making your content clear and easy to understand. It can increase the chance that your audience will actually read your content. And to improve readability, you need to consider your audience. And you'll want to keep the structure simple. Keep your sentences short and sweet and use shorter words. If your piece is too wordy, readers will get impatient and only skim read or decide not to continue. Select simple nouns, verbs, and subject-verb construction. Although it can be difficult to get used to, it's crucial to writing for the digital world. Twitter can actually help you practice this skill. The 140 characters that Twitter requires you to stay within forces you to be direct and concise. It maintains that only a single idea should be contained within a tweet, which is how you should structure your sentences for a website or blog post. So, to recap, the starting point for all plain language writing is to determine your audience. From there, determine your writing goals to know what you want to write and how to write it. Then, when writing in plain language, begin with the lead sentence, 25 words max. This is the hook, so make it interesting and engaging and make readers want to read on. Followed by 2 to 3 sentences that will cover all the basic and most necessary information, such as who, what, when, where, and why, and how. The paragraphs following this should expand and provide more details to the story. Include definitions and quotes, and don't forget to write out acronyms. Again, keep in mind the 140-character Twitter guideline, or 1 thought per sentence. Now, we've mentioned readability or reading level several times in this presentation, so I want to take a quick moment to explain 2 ways that you can check the reading level on your content once it's written. The first is to use readability statistics in Microsoft Word or other similar programs. Readability statistics allows you to determine the grade level of your writing. Microsoft Word has a readability statistic plugin that you can turn on in the Tools menu. Exact instructions for how to turn them on can be found in the plain language writing handout associated with Suffice's how-to video on plain language writing, the link to which will be included later in this presentation. Here's what it will look like once you turn on the plugin and run a spell check. When Word finishes checking the spelling and grammar, it displays information about the reading level on the document. This is calculated through assessing factors in your writing, such as the average number of sentences per paragraph, words per sentences, and even the number of passive sentences. The readability statistics will also give you information based on 2 types of readability tests as well. The Flesh Test Reading Ease Test. This test rates text on a 100-point scale. The higher the score, the easier it is to understand the document. For most standard files, you want the score to be between 60 and 70. The second, Kincaid grade level test. This test rates the text on a U.S. grade school level. For example, a score of 8.0 means an 8th grader can understand the document. For most documents, aim for a score approximately 7.0 to 8.0. If you're writing for an audience that is not an academic audience, in order to make your content accessible, you want to aim for these scores. A grade level of no higher than grade 9 and lower is better. A 0 on a passive sentences and no more than 15%. And a 2.5 to 3.5 sentences per paragraph. Depending on the style of writing, the number of sentences per paragraph might be higher. But ask yourself, why not break up that long paragraph? It makes your document more readable. 12 to 20 words per sentences and never more than 35. 4.4 to 4.6 characters per word. Another program that you can use to check readability of your writing is the Hemingway app. It's a pretty self-explanatory app that basically you copy your text into the browser and the app highlights complicated sentences in red, yellow, or green depending on the complexity of the sentence. After this webinar, we'll be sending you a number of handouts that are fantastic resources to improve the accessibility of writing and work. These resources will include a target audience profile template, an editing checklist that goes over all areas of writing that you want to avoid, such as long, complicated sentences, and we're also including a copy of Suffice's perfect blog post template. In addition to these resources, you may want to consider taking a look at Suffice's plain language writing video, which we have on our YouTube channel and on our website. And again, the Hemingway app is a tool that will show you the reading level of your sentences that will help you edit them to be considered plain language. Finally, as previously mentioned, Twitter is a useful tool at forcing you to write clearly and concisely.
All right, so I think we'll switch over to the Q&A period because it looks like there's not much else coming in the survey. Please use the chat box to ask us any questions you might have. And I guess, Kathleen, I'll start with one of the questions that came in when people registered. So Madeline Chan asked, what are the best resources to use for checking reading level of materials? So I think our presentation did go over that. I personally really like the Hemingway app. I find it much easier to use when it comes to assessing my personal writing, especially because it highlights what exactly the problems are with your sentences. But one frustrating part about the Hemingway app is that it really forces you to extremely simplify your sentences. So if you're going for a grade 8 level, it doesn't always recognize certain sentence structures as not being overly complex, or maybe that's just me assuming it's not overly complex. But the Hemingway app is a great visual tool for highlighting where you're needing to simplify, and you do all the editing in the actual app itself, and then you can copy and paste it and put it right into your document. And then again, we mentioned the readability statistics that you can turn on in Microsoft Word. And again, with the resources we send out afterwards, the package also includes instructions for how to do that. And then Christine Ackerley asked, what is the most common excuse or complaint you hear about why people don't use plain language? That's a very good question. Personally speaking, I don't always use plain language. One of the things about working in a specific field, community campus engagement with researchers and all that, is that you get caught up in the jargon, and it's harder to see whether or not you're writing in plain language. And for me, I guess the excuse is that it's hard. It's hard to write in plain language. It does not come naturally for most people, especially since we're so immersed in the work that we do, and we already understand it, and it's hard to look at it with fresh eyes and understand how somebody who has no experience or limited experience in the field actually is reading your material. So that, I think, would probably be one of the most common excuses or complaints. The other thing was one of the pieces that I addressed earlier is that people actually see plain language writing as dumbing down content. And I hope that we demonstrated that that's not what it is. It's about taking the concepts and explaining it in ways that people will understand. And it doesn't mean that people who need it to be explained in different ways are dumb in any way. What it means is that you need to share it in ways that fit all learning styles and fit all people's experiences and backgrounds, because you're the expert and it's your job to help others understand what you're teaching on. So does anybody have any other questions for us today? If you could write them in the chat box, that'd be great. Well, one question I would have for Carly is, Carly, you've been doing a lot of writing for the Suffice project. What is one of the biggest challenges you find when you're writing the material for Suffice in plain language?
Probably staying consistent in the reading level. I know sometimes I get carried away and I get off track, and then I have to go back over my work and check it again to make sure that it is written in plain language and that everyone can understand it.
Yeah, I can see that happening definitely, because like I said, you're caught up in the jargon and the knowledge, and sometimes it's hard to remember. So I'm seeing no questions come in. So basically what's going to happen, we've recorded this webinar. We'll put the video online. And once it's ready online, we'll send out the link to everyone, and we'll include some resources like Carly went over earlier in the presentation. And if anybody has any questions about the resources, about the presentation, or any plain language questions at all, please feel free to send them to us, and I will be happy to answer them. The email that you'll be sent is from the suffice@carleton.ca email address, and that address is monitored by both Carly and myself, so we'll be able to respond to your inquiries easily. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and I guess that's it.